Hey everyone, and welcome to Webnovel Lens. We're back with another exciting chapter of Lord of the Mysteries. In this video, we'll be summarizing all the important happenings in Chapter 11. Let's get started. Chapter 11, Real Culinary Skills. The norm is for everyone to die together. Very glad that I'm still alive. Fortunate that I'm still alive. Klein felt a chill and quickly ran to the door, wanting to ask the policeman for protection. But he stopped at the handle. He thought about how the officer had said everyone usually died in such situations. Why hadn't they offered him, a potential witness, any protection? It seemed too careless. He wondered if they were testing him or if it was a trap. Many thoughts rushed through his mind. He suspected the police were still secretly watching him to see his reaction. Feeling calmer after this thought, he was no longer so panicked. He slowly opened the door and deliberately shouted down the stairs in a trembling voice, "You guys will protect me, right?" Tap, tap, tap. There was no response from the police, and their footsteps on the wooden stairs didn't change rhythm. "I know. You'll do that." Klein shouted again, trying to sound like a normal person in danger. The sound of footsteps gradually faded and disappeared on the ground floor. Klein snorted and laughed to himself. Wasn't that response too fake? Their acting skills aren't good enough. He didn't chase after them. Instead, he went back into his room and closed the door. Over the next few hours, Klein acted restless, nervous, agitated, and mumbled words he didn't understand. He kept up the act even though no one was around. This is called the self-cultivation of an actor, he thought, amused. As the sun began to set, painting the horizon reddish-orange, the other tenants in the apartment started coming home. Klein shifted his focus. Melissa is almost done with school. He looked at the stove, lifted the kettle, removed the coal, and took out the revolver. Without hesitation, he reached behind the loose wooden strips under his bunk bed. He clipped the revolver's left wheel between a strip and the board and waited anxiously, worried the police might suddenly burst in with guns. He knew that even if it was the age of steam, hiding a gun like this might not be completely safe with extraordinary powers around. After a few minutes of waiting with no movement at the door, he only heard the chatter of two tenants going to the heart of the wild bar. Phew, Klein sighed, feeling relieved. Now, all he had to do was wait for Melissa to come home and cook the stewed mutton with tender peas. Just thinking about it made his mouth water, remembering how Melissa usually cooked it. She would boil the water, stir-fry the meat, add onions, salt, a little pepper, and water. After some time, she'd add the peas and potatoes and let it simmer with the lid on for another 40 to 50 minutes. It's indeed a simple and crude way to do it, relying purely on the flavor of the meat itself. Klein thought, shaking his head. But he understood that common people didn't have many spices or fancy cooking methods. They had to stick to simple, practical, and cheap ways. As long as the meat wasn't burnt or spoiled, it was good enough for people who only ate meat once or twice a week. Klein wasn't a great cook himself and usually ordered takeout. But by cooking 3 or 4 times a week, he had gained some basic skills and felt he could at least make the mutton edible. If Melissa comes back to cook, it will be after 7:30 p.m. She'll be starving by then. It's time for her to see what real cooking is. Klein told himself, making an excuse to cook. First, he restarted the fire, got water, and washed the mutton. Then he took out the cutting board and knife and chopped the mutton into small pieces. He decided to blame his sudden cooking skills on the dead Welch McGovern, saying that Welch had hired a chef who was good at mid-seashore cuisine and often made his own delicious dishes and invited people to try them. Well, the dead can't argue with me, he thought. However, he felt a little guilty, remembering this was a world with beyonders, and the dead might not necessarily be unable to speak. He put aside his conflicted thoughts and placed the chopped meat in a soup bowl. Then he took out the spice box and added a spoonful of the slightly yellowed salt. He also carefully took some black peppercorns from a small bottle, mixing them with the meat to marinate. He put the saucepan on the stove and, while it heated up, found the carrots from yesterday and chopped them with the onions he bought today. Once his preparations were done, he took out a small can from the cupboard and opened it. There wasn't much lard left. Klein took a spoonful, put it in the pan, and melted it. He added the carrots and onions and stirred them for a while. As the fragrance started to fill the air, Klein poured all the mutton into the pot and carefully fried it. He realized he should have added cooking wine or at least red wine, but the Moretti family couldn't afford such luxuries and only drank beer once a week. So, he used what he had and poured in some boiled water. After letting it simmer for about 20 minutes, he opened the lid, added the tender peas and chopped potatoes, along with a cup of hot water and 2 spoons of salt. He closed the lid, turned down the heat, and exhaled contentedly, waiting for his sister to come home. As minutes passed, the smell in the room intensified. There was the rich aroma of the meat, the earthy smell of potatoes, and the refreshing scent of onions. The smells mixed together, and Klein swallowed his saliva from time to time, checking the time on his pocket watch. After more than 40 minutes, he heard some not-so-quick but steady footsteps approaching. A key was inserted into the lock, the handle turned, and the door opened. Before Melissa even came in, she whispered doubtfully, "Smells good." With her bag still in her hand, she stepped inside and glanced at the stove. "You made this." Melissa took off her veil hat, her hand pausing in midair as she looked at Klein in astonishment. She twitched her nose, inhaling more of the fragrance. Her eyes softened, and she seemed to gain some confidence. "You made this?" she asked again. "Are you afraid I'd waste the mutton?" Klein smiled, returning her question. Without waiting for an answer, he said to himself, "Don't worry, I specifically asked Welch to teach me how to cook this dish. You know, he has a good cook." First time. Melissa's eyebrows furrowed slightly but were smoothed out by the delicious smell. "Looks like I'm talented," Klein laughed. "It's almost done. Put your books and hat down. Go wash your hands, and then get ready to taste it. I'm very confident about it." Hearing her brother's clear instructions and seeing his gentle and calm smile, Melissa stood frozen at the door, unable to respond for a moment. "Do you prefer the mutton to cook longer?" Klein urged with a laugh. "Ah, okay. Melissa snapped out of her daze. With her bag and hat in her hands, she quickly rushed into the room. When the lid of the saucepan was lifted, a burst of steam rose before Klein's eyes. 2 pieces of rye bread were already placed next to the stew, soaking up the fragrance and heat to become soft. By the time Melissa had put away her things, washed her hands and face, and returned, a plate of stewed mutton with tender peas, potatoes, carrots, and onions was already on the table. 2 pieces of rye bread, lightly colored by dipping them in the gravy, were on their plates. Come on, try it, Klein said, pointing to the wooden fork and spoon next to the plate. Melissa was still a little confused. She didn't refuse and picked up a potato with her fork, putting it in her mouth and biting it gently. The taste of the starchy potato and the rich gravy filled her mouth. She started salivating and quickly finished the potato in a few bites. Try the mutton, Klein gestured with his chin. He had tasted it earlier and thought it was just barely okay, but it would be good enough for someone who didn't eat meat often. Melissa's eyes were full of anticipation as she carefully forked some mutton. It was very tender and almost melted in her mouth. The flavor of the meat exploded, filling her mouth with delicious juices. It was an amazing feeling, and Melissa couldn't stop eating. By the time she realized it, she had already eaten several pieces of mutton. I. Klein, this was supposed to be for you. Melissa blushed and stammered. I nibbled some of the food just now. It's the privilege of being a cook, Klein smiled, reassuring his sister. He picked up his fork and spoon. He ate some meat, then some peas, and then dipped pieces of rye bread in the gravy. Melissa relaxed and was drawn back into enjoying the meal by Klein's normal behavior. It's really delicious. It doesn't seem like you were doing it for the first time, Melissa said, looking at the empty dish and praising him sincerely. Even the gravy was gone. It's still far from Welch's chef's cooking. When I'm rich, I'll take you and Benson to a restaurant for a better meal. Klein said, starting to look forward to it himself. Your interview. Burp. Melissa didn't finish her sentence because she suddenly let out a satisfied burp. She quickly covered her mouth, looking embarrassed. The fault is with the stewed mutton with tender peas. It was just too delicious. Klein laughed silently and decided not to tease his sister. He pointed to the plate and said, this is your mission. All right. Melissa immediately stood up, took the basin, and rushed out the door to wash the dishes. When she returned, she opened the cupboard to check the spices and other items as usual. Did you just use them? Melissa asked, surprised, turning to Klein with the black pepper bottle and lard can in her hands. Klein shrugged and laughed. Just a little. It's the price of a delicacy. Melissa's eyes twinkled, her expression changing for a moment before she finally said, let me cook in the future. You have to hurry up and prepare for the interview. You have to think about your job. That wraps up our summary of Lord of the Mysteries, Chapter 11. Follow for more web novel insights, and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss our next video.